In this video, we're going to talk about tips and tricks for people who have high communication. And ironically, I have the most to say about tips and tricks for communication for communication. So let's dive into that. The first tip or practice that I want to share with you, especially when it comes to potentially taking up too much airtime in a work environment. As a team leader, you could kind of set this as your team meeting standards so that you follow it, and also anyone else on your team who has high communication can follow it. But it's something that I learned from my time in nonprofit when I was working closely with the organization City Year. They use this all the time, and it's called No Stueso. So it's an acronym for no one speaks twice until everyone speaks once. And I think this can be a really good thing, whether you communicate this out to a team or you just kind of hold on to it in your head of, I'm not going to speak again until everyone else has had the opportunity to speak to whatever topic we're on. Now, you might find that you are getting really antsy and you're like, I have to say something. I would encourage you to just kind of have a notebook with you in those sorts of meeting situations where anytime a thought comes up for you, you can just jot it down so that you don't forget it, but you also can determine if it really needs to be said. So no stueso, no one speaks twice until everyone speaks once. This is it's a really powerful tool when in a work environment, in a group environment, in a place where there might be some quieter people, there might be some slower to process and speak people. Make sure that all the communication people aren't the only ones talking. Something you can also do is if you know someone has kind of a complementary strength to you in your work environment, you tend to be in a lot of meetings together, or even if you are presenting and they're going to be there as a support person, is to ask them to give you some sort of signal when you've gone too far, when you've taken too much airtime or you've been talking for too long. This is something for a trusted friend. You can be really clear about the parameters of that. Like, hey, if I start to ramble which is unlikely for you, to be honest, but if you start to go a little too deep into something that doesn't need to be talked about just then, or you're kind of jumping to the next topic, to have someone who can be like, hey, cut it. And acknowledge that you're going to see that and receive that and take action on that. This can be really helpful for you. It can also be something if you are in a lot of Zoom meetings or kind of on camera, that someone could just send you a chat to be like, hey, wrap it up. You could share this with a leader or a boss, like, hey, I know that I can get going. Please provide feedback. Please step in if I'm taking it too far, if it's going on too long. So another thing to just kind of think about when it comes to airtime and how you're kind of taking up space and time. All in the same kind of vein. And I think about this a lot for people who are on Zoom calls a lot. Let's say you're in a team meeting and everyone's supposed to go around and give an update about their work or about their weekend or whatever it is, right? Set a little timer on your computer. Pull up your stopwatch on your phone, on your computer, whatever it is, and set a timer for a minute or 2 minutes or whatever feels like appropriate for that space. And then you can see it and you have a visual reminder of okay, not only do you need to kind of keep it short, but it's kind of this fun challenge for you of how do I express everything I want to express in a time blocked space? How do I say the perfect thing to get across what I want to get across in 2 minutes? This, maybe is not something to rely on all the time, but in those situations where maybe you feel or you've received feedback that you kind of just go on a little bit too long, set a timer for yourself. It can be so, so, so helpful. I don't have communication high, but I do often when I'm on a Zoom call and we say, hey, we're each going to take 30 seconds to introduce ourselves or whatever it is, I set a timer because I want to stick to the 30 seconds. I want to be respectful of people's time, of their attention, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that you can kind of try to see if it works for you in the work environment. And I mentioned this in a couple of other videos, but it's really important for you to have a sounding board. So whether that's a coach, a mentor, a friend, a colleague who is trusted, thrive when you have that opportunity, but make sure that person knows that they're that person, right? Make sure they know that that's their job in this conversation. Like, hey, I need a sounding board. Great. That is a much different, like, I'm going to approach that conversation with you a lot differently than if you were just like, hey, what's up? So find some sounding boards for yourself and make sure they know at what points you actually need them to be a sounding board. So those are some of the main tricks for communication when it comes to the strength communication. Let's dive into some relationship tips and tricks. I think the biggest tip that I can give you, and if you take nothing away from this conversation, please take this: practice active listening. You are amazing at communicating. It's likely you need to practice your skill of listening, and active listening in particular. So if you're not familiar with active listening, I will give you a short lesson here. Active listening is simply listening to what someone is saying without the need to respond or without planning your response, which I mentioned in another video. So if someone is talking about their dog, right? They're telling you a story about their dog. Your job in an active listening situation is to literally listen to everything they say until they are done, and then think about your response. Now, this is hard. This can be very hard, especially when you're trying to have a conversation, right? You want to be able to respond and have something to say. I promise you something will come to you, especially you. You are not going to have a problem coming up with something to say, but getting comfortable with being fully focused on the person that is talking to you and not getting into your own head it's so valuable. It makes people feel so seen and so heard and so valued. And again, you're not going to have a problem responding. So when I was in yoga teacher training, this is something we had to do at the beginning of every single class, every single session that we were in. And it was tough. Basically what we did, and so you can kind of practice this. Either you can actually ask someone to practice this with you, or you can sort of just practice it on your own while people are talking. But what we had to do is we would sit down, eye contact, and the other person would have a minute to just share anything, really. It could be like about their day. It could be the most random thing of all time. It didn't matter. They would share for a minute, and you would sit there silently, and not just silently. We were not allowed to make any sort of gestures. So I was not allowed to like nod or smile or like show any sort of like, that part was hard. You don't necessarily have to do that with active listening. And especially if someone doesn't know you're doing that, it might come off as a little bit weird, but this was just part of the training, part of the practice. And so no reactions to what this person was saying until they were done. And when they were done, we would say, what I heard you say was, and basically you would repeat back to them what they said and what you heard. And it was a really cool activity because then the person who had originally talked would basically say, yes, that's what I was trying to say, or no, that's not what I was trying to say. And it's not only a good activity for improving your communication, but also for recognizing like, wow, I must not have been listening very well then, if that's not what you were trying to say. So again, you're probably not going to do this in every conversation that you're in, but what you can do, and a way to kind of keep yourself from falling back into that, planning what you're going to say next, is listen to what someone is saying and in a slightly less formal way, repeat back to them like, oh, interesting, you blah, 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 blah. And they'll be like, yeah. And then you say, and then you can jump into what it is you're going to say, right? This is it's just a really great skill to have in life. Everybody needs to practice active listening, not just you communication, but for you in particular, especially when you're trying to develop deep relationships, this one is going to be very, very key for you. So if you have more questions about active listening or you want a little bit of help with that, just reply to this email and let me know. I am more than happy to kind of talk you through that in a more in-depth way, but just from a high level, practice listening to everything they're saying, repeating back what they said, and then diving into your own response to that particular story or comment or whatever it was. This practice of active listening is also actually going to help improve what you're already good at, which is helping others communicate their ideas but you're not able to do that if you're not able to really take in what it is that they're saying. So being able to listen and reflect back what you understood they were saying and then kind of check if that's right. This not only makes them feel seen and heard, it also helps them to kind of hone their messaging, as I was talking about in that yoga teacher training example. Because if you reflect something back to them and they're like, that's not at all what I was intending to say, it helps them also be like, okay, how do I be more clear on this? And maybe that's something you can help them with, right? Maybe that's something that you can use your skills of communication to make easier for them. I think the biggest tip here, besides the active listening when it comes to relationships, is just providing space for other people. It's really important for you to know that other folks are going to sometimes find it harder to express themselves, express their needs, express their expectations, etc., to you in relationship. And that can lead to tension and frustration. And that's something where you're probably expressing your needs and expectations and things very clearly. Often, most likely that's not an occasional thing for you. But just know that just because someone else is not expressing a lot of expectations or needs does not mean that they do not have expectations or needs. It is your job as someone who excels at communication to be able to dig into that with people and help them figure out how to communicate what their needs are, what their expectations are, what their boundaries are, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I do not say that to say it is your job entirely to do that for people, but people that you're in relationship with, it can be very one-sided if you're very clear about what you want, but you don't really know what they want. So learning how to ask questions, get to the core of what people want, and helping them express what it is that they want in a more clear way is something that you are probably very well suited to do. So those are some of the things we have for relationships. Again, active listening, active listening, active listening. Give that one a try. Dive into that a little bit for yourself. Now I want to talk about goal setting. So the biggest thing for you with goal setting, there's kind of two approaches that I would take. One is around setting the goal, and one is around kind of maintaining energy to achieve the goal. So in setting the goal, sounding board. Super important to make sure that when you are setting and pursuing goals, you always have someone to act as a sounding board for you. And this just helps you to be really clear and really intentional about the goals that you're setting. Again, you're very good at making clear statements and coming up with clear thoughts and things to say. But when you're goal setting, sometimes you might get a little lost in the story of it all and not necessarily be able to connect like why you're setting that goal. Like, how does that move you toward the life you want to be living, the job you want to be doing, the promotion raise, etc., whatever it is. So having someone who can really kind of take in what you're saying, reflect it back to you, help you hone it is going to be important. Again, amazing opportunity to hire a coach. You, I imagine, are really going to benefit. You would really benefit from having a coach just because they are a built-in sounding board. That's literally 90% of the job. Okay, second tip here is around kind of maintaining energy toward a goal. So I would imagine that you get a lot of energy once you've determined what the goal is in communicating that goal to people and sharing it. Like, whoo, I'm so excited about this goal. Let me tell you everything about it, right? That is probably the energizing part for you. Again, if you were only to have communication as a strength, communication plus your other strengths would make this a little more nuanced. But assuming you only have communication as a strength, that is going to be part of the energizing piece for you when it comes to goal setting and goal achievement. So in order to maintain your energy throughout what might be a long process for like a big project or a long-term goal, my recommendation to you is to like a board of advisors or have determined stakeholders you can bring in not only as a sounding board, but also where you can schedule like check-ins with them, where at those check-ins, you're going to have to communicate your progress on said project or goal. And I think that being able to have these specific times where you do share your progress with people, that being able to storytell about where you are, well, not only having that place where like you're going to have to report to somebody what's going on, so it kind of motivates you to do some stuff. But I think in being able to share where you are in your progress is actually going to be the thing that gives you those energy boosts to kind of keep going. So when you're starting to feel like you're flatlining a little bit, losing steam, schedule a check-in with someone. Be like, hey, I want to tell you about what's going on with the project right now. Or ask them up front to check in with you at certain times if that's more motivating to you. It just kind of depends on you as a person. But yeah, I really think that this is going to be one of the things that helps to keep you energized and therefore moving forward toward your goal in a way that it wouldn't really motivate other people necessarily the same way. Just something to think about with goal setting, being able to share what you're doing with other people along the way in order to maintain and boost your energy and keep you moving forward. That's all I have for you for tips and tricks today for communication. I hope that this has been helpful. As always, there's always a little bit of tough love in every single video, just because we all have blind spots, right? And if you want to dive more into improving and kind of maximizing your communication strength, I would love to do a strength session with you. You can always sign up for coaching sessions with me where we dive into what this looks like specifically for you rather than on a more broad general basis. But until next strength, I hope you enjoyed these videos, and I will see you back here for our next conversation.